There are phrases that, at first glance, may seem innocent, even sweet. But behind that veil of apparent tenderness, they can hide manipulative intentions, an alarming lack of emotional responsibility, and a deep, almost invisible resistance to personal growth. When a woman doesn't pay attention to these signs, she risks entering relationships that slowly drain her energy, distort her inner clarity, and disconnect her from her most sacred power, her intuition. And it's often not direct aggression that causes the most damage, but what is hidden behind seemingly harmless words that are laden with psychological weight. Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist, spoke about the shadow unconscious, that deep zone of the psyche where we banish the aspects of ourselves that we don't want to see. What we deny in our consciousness, we project onto others, and it is precisely there, in these unresolved projections, where toxic patterns find fertile ground to grow. That's why identifying certain phrases from the beginning is not just useful, it's vital. Recognizing them not only avoids unnecessary conflicts, but also protects you from falling into an emotionally devastating dynamic. Because many times, behind a conversation that seems normal, there's a psychological game that can cost you your mental peace, your emotional dignity, and your personal power. The philosopher Seneca already warned us with brutal clarity. It's not that we have little time, it's that we waste a lot of it. And the most tragic thing is that we often waste it on people who are not prepared to receive us with the depth with which we love, nor with the commitment with which we give ourselves. That's why today, I'm going to show you 5 phrases that, if they come from a man, should set off alarm bells. Not because you're paranoid, but because you're aware, and because you've worked too hard for your inner peace to put it in the hands of someone emotionally immature. Stay with me until the end, because you're not only going to learn how to detect these phrases, but I will also teach you how to respond with strength, emotional intelligence, and without losing your center. Let's begin. 1. You have to accept me as I am. At first glance, this statement may seem like an act of sincerity, even a display of vulnerability. But be careful. When this phrase is used as an excuse to perpetuate harmful behaviors, we are facing one of the most common and dangerous red flags in a relationship. Jung said that self-knowledge is the foundation of all wisdom, but he also insisted on something deeper. There is no true transformation without integration. It's not just about knowing yourself, but about embracing our shadows and working with them to evolve. A man who hides behind, "This is just who I am," to justify his emotional flaws is not being authentic. He's evading internal work. He's giving up the commitment to grow. And that resignation, when dragged into a relationship, becomes an enormous burden for someone who is willing to evolve. This phrase usually comes up after you've already started noticing certain patterns: emotional manipulation, lack of responsibility, passive-aggressive behaviors, or simply an immaturity that manifests in small but constant wounds. And the most dangerous part isn't just what he says, but how he reacts when you try to talk about the issue. He plays the victim. He accuses you of wanting to change him, makes you feel guilty for having standards. But there is one truth you must tattoo on your soul. Accepting someone doesn't mean normalizing the unacceptable. True authenticity isn't about staying stagnant. It's about having the courage to grow, to transform, and to become a better version of yourself every day. Marcus Aurelius, the wise Stoic, expressed this with a clarity that remains a guiding light. The perfection of character consists in living each day as if it were the last, without laziness, without hypocrisy. A conscious woman who has traveled the arduous path of self-knowledge is not made to row a boat alone while her partner doesn't even have the intention of getting on board. Accepting these kinds of phrases without analyzing them, without questioning them, is like signing a silent contract with exhaustion. And when you give your energy to someone who doesn't want to move forward, you end up betraying yourself. It leads you straight into a future made of repeated excuses, broken promises, and an invisible but exhausting dynamic, where you carry all the emotional weight while he remains motionless. Remember, the ancient Stoics didn't just speak of self-mastery. They also understood that the environment shapes our character. If the person you share your life with isn't pushing you to grow, then, even if they don't say it aloud, they are holding you back. So the next time you hear that phrase disguised as emotional depth, don't be fooled by its sensitive tone or apparent sincerity. Ask yourself a much more direct question. Is he really willing to look within? Or is he just using sophisticated words to avoid the work that change requires? Because if behind his speech there's a constant resistance to evolve, a denial of personal responsibility, and a defensive attitude toward any constructive criticism, you're not facing a simple difference of opinions. You are facing a psychological pattern that over time not only repeats, but intensifies. And that's when the situation stops being uncomfortable and becomes dangerous. Accepting that phrase is only the first step toward a silent but devastating cycle. From there, other behaviors will follow, just as subtle but much more destructive. A criticism disguised as humor, emotional indifference presented as maturity, a lack of empathy justified as honesty. Without realizing it, you will find yourself changing, making adjustments, giving up small parts of yourself to make the relationship work, while he remains unchanged. Protecting your peace is not selfishness, it's self-respect. You are not here to rescue anyone. You are here to build something real with someone who also wants to grow, who dares to recognize their own wounds and has the courage to heal them, just like you do every day. Because a man who refuses to transform doesn't only sabotage himself, he drags you down with his stagnation. Stay true to your values. Honor your integrity, even when your emotions whisper that you should stay, even when your heart tries to justify what your soul already knows, because what comes next is even more delicate. All my exes were crazy or toxic. When a man says this, it may seem like he's just venting, sharing his pain or his past experiences. But don't be fooled. Behind those words lies a dark pattern, a chronic victim mentality, profound emotional immaturity, and an unconscious projection that reveals much more than he realizes. The Stoic philosophy made this clear centuries ago. True growth begins when we stop blaming the outside world and begin to examine our own inner world. Epictetus said it plainly. It's not the events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. So if he always speaks of his exes as if they are the absolute culprits, if he never stops to recognize his part in the conflicts, then you are not dealing with someone who has healed. You are dealing with someone who refuses to look at his own reflection. This is where deep psychology comes into play. Jung taught that what we do not make conscious ends up governing our lives from the shadows. Many men who criticize all their exes are not describing what they lived. They are projecting what they have yet to resolve within themselves. That phrase, as common as it is dangerous, reveals a mindset that flees from responsibility and takes refuge in drama. People with this narrative tend to repeat the same patterns in each relationship, blaming everyone except themselves, idealizing the role of the victim, and silently hoping that you will be the only woman who won't disappoint them. But be careful. No one escapes their shadow unless they are willing to face it. The real question is not whether all his exes were truly toxic. The question is there a pattern in him that he refuses to recognize? Is he using that story as a shield to avoid transformation? A conscious woman who has learned to value herself does not swallow that narrative without questioning it first. Jung said it with terrifying clarity. What we deny enslaves us, and getting involved with someone who avoids their own emotional responsibility is like trying to build a house on sand. No matter how much love you give, how much effort you invest, how much patience you offer, if he is not willing to break with his own unconscious scripts, he will keep repeating the same story. But this time, they end up turning you into the protagonist of a story you didn't write, because the man who needs to eternally play the victim role will sooner or later find a way to make you the new antagonist of his emotional script. Being in such a relationship is like rowing in a boat with a constant leak. No matter how much love you pour in, it will always be sinking. Because the problem is not your commitment, your patience, or your dedication. The problem is the emotional hole he refuses to repair. And this is where a quality comes into play that is not always romantic, but absolutely necessary: emotional discipline. The ability to see beyond the sweet words, to observe the patterns, to ask yourself uncomfortable but essential questions. Has he ever spoken about what he did wrong in his past relationships? Or does his discourse always revolve around what others did to him? Because if he has never taken responsibility before, what makes you think he will start now? Remember this firmly. It is not your role to be anyone's therapist. You are not here to mend the pieces of a man who doesn't even want to heal. You are here to share your life with someone who walks beside you, not someone who drags you into their storm. Speaking of emotional manipulation, there is one phrase you must learn to identify from the very first moment. Because even though it may sound like a passionate declaration of love, in reality, it is a trap disguised as tenderness. If you really loved me, you would do what I ask. This phrase is one of the subtlest and most corrosive forms of emotional blackmail. At first glance, it may seem like a sincere request, a way of expressing needs. But if you listen closely, if you look carefully, what's really hiding there is emotional pressure. A strategy to manipulate your decisions using your own love against you. The Stoics knew this well. Authentic love is not imposed, it is chosen. It is built from freedom, mutual admiration, and respect, not from guilt or emotional coercion. Epictetus said it clearly. No one can enslave you emotionally without your consent. Carl Jung also explored this dynamic from the perspective of power. In his studies on the shadow, he pointed out how many unbalanced relationships are born when one of the partners projects their insecurity and need for control under the guise of love. And phrases like this are proof of it. When a man says, "If you loved me, you would do this," what he is drawing, without you noticing, is an invisible line that conditions your affection. Deep down, he is telling you, only if you do what I want do you deserve my love. That is not love. It's emotional manipulation wrapped in a romantic package. An emotionally conscious woman who knows and respects herself must have the clarity to distinguish between a healthy request and a camouflaged demand, because yielding to these kinds of phrases may seem like an act of love in the moment. But over time you begin to lose pieces of yourself, your authenticity, your boundaries, your personal power. And the most dangerous thing is that the more you yield, the more the demands increase. First, it's a test of love. Then it becomes a routine of emotional submission. And at some point, you no longer know if you're acting out of love or out of fear of losing him. These kinds of phrases not only manipulate, they redefine love through guilt. They teach you, without you realizing it, that love means pleasing, yielding, abandoning your own desires to sustain a dynamic that only feeds the ego of the other. Philosophy reminds us that no one can make us feel inferior without our consent. But when that phrase, "you're not enough for me," comes from the mouth of someone who says they love you, the blow is not only emotional, it's existential. Because what they are trying to do is not point out a flaw, but plant doubt in the most sacred place you have, your self-confidence. And when a woman starts to question her own value based on what another person says, she enters a spiral of self-betrayal. Carl Jung taught that what we don't face within ourselves ends up manifesting in our relationships. And many times, the man who throws that cruel phrase is not talking about you, but about his own inability to connect, his chronic dissatisfaction with life, and an insatiable need for superiority to avoid facing his emptiness. When someone tells you that you're not enough, what they are really doing is projecting their shadow, their unprocessed pain, their fear of real love. Because real love does not measure, does not compare, does not question your essence. Real love celebrates your presence, your authenticity, your strength. Accepting that phrase is like signing a contract with insecurity. It is allowing someone else to define your value. And that's where a silent but destructive dynamic begins. You try harder, give more, sacrifice more, searching for a void that was never yours. Stoic philosophy makes it clear. Your inner peace does not depend on the approval of others, but on your alignment with yourself. When you allow someone to play with your perception of value, listen. You are giving up the steering wheel of your life. And the most dangerous thing is that this tactic rarely appears alone. Once you doubt your worth, you become more vulnerable to other types of manipulation. You start tolerating the intolerable, justifying emotional abuse, and believing that you constantly need to improve in order to be worthy of love. But a conscious woman who has walked through her own emotional desert knows that true love doesn't hurt, that the person who deserves you doesn't need to diminish you to feel big. No one who truly loves you will make you feel insufficient, because authentic love doesn't come from judgment, it comes from acceptance. It doesn't seek to mold you, but to accompany you. It doesn't demand perfection, it celebrates your humanity. So if you ever hear that phrase, remember, it's not about you, it's about him, his shadow, his lack of emotional maturity, his fear of committing to something real, not an idealized fantasy that never makes mistakes. And the answer is not to change yourself, but to distance yourself from someone who doesn't know how to see you. Not because they are incapable of seeing you, but because you are capable of recognizing it yourself. Because when a woman knows herself, honors herself, and respects herself, no words can destroy what she has built from within. Stoic philosophy affirms this firmly. A free soul does not submit to the judgments of others, nor does it seek validation outside of itself. If a man needs to lower you to feel important, what he is showing is not power, but fragility. He is revealing an emptiness he tries to hide with criticism, an insecurity disguised as demands. And this is where consciousness becomes your shield. A conscious woman does not respond to manipulation with more giving, nor to contempt with more effort. She responds with clarity, with boundaries, with the firmness of someone who no longer needs to prove her worth because she has decided to live in it. Marcus Aurelius said it. The respect you give yourself must be stronger than any desire for approval. If you find yourself in front of someone who constantly makes you feel insufficient, you don't need to analyze it any further. The answer is clear. It is not your task to convince someone who doesn't want to see you, because true love is not earned, it's shared. It doesn't require constant proof. It is built with presence, mutual support, and emotional freedom. And when someone turns love into a competition against your own insecurities, they are not loving you, they are controlling you. Carl Jung warned us, what we do not make conscious becomes our destiny. If you do not make this pattern of devaluation conscious, you could end up living in a relationship where every step you take is a response to someone else's judgment and not your inner truth. The biggest mistake is not listening to this phrase. The real mistake is staying after hearing it, thinking that you can still change their perception. You are not here to be enough for someone else. You are here to be authentic with yourself. An integral woman does not fight for love. The love that truly deserves you will never put you in that position. So if someone ever tells you that you're not enough, don't take it as a verdict. Take it as a signal, a warning, a mirror that shows you exactly the kind of energy you need to distance yourself from. Because true love doesn't test you. It supports you, pushes you, and above all, it honors you. It's about protecting yourself. It's not about walking through the world with distrust, but with awareness. Because when a woman sees clearly, she doesn't need to shout. She doesn't need to prove anything. She just acts from her center, from her power, from that silent strength that comes from deeply knowing herself. Carl Jung said that the greatest privilege of being human is becoming who you truly are. And that path of individuation cannot be walked if you're constantly trapped in relationships where language is a weapon and love is a control strategy. Remember, each of these phrases, even though they might seem innocent, carries the mark of a hidden intention. Some come from unhealed wounds, others from an inflated ego, and some simply from the fear of losing control. But all of them, without exception, have an effect. They distort your truth, cloud your judgment, and disconnect you from yourself. That's why the purpose of this message is not just to alert you, but to empower you. So that the next time you hear one of these phrases, you don't take it as an isolated thing, but as a sign that you need to return to yourself, breathe, feel, and decide from the woman who no longer settles for the minimum, who doesn't compromise her peace, who doesn't negotiate her dignity. Because a woman who knows herself, who respects herself, and who has done the internal work doesn't fall into emotional traps. She sees them, understands them, and chooses not to enter them. Remember this. 1. You have to accept me just as I am. It's not authenticity if it comes with a denial of change. 2. All my exes were toxic. It's not a story, it's a projection. 3. If you really loved me, you would do what I ask. It's not love, it's manipulation. 4. You're not enough for me. It's not an opinion, it's an aggression disguised. 5. Do whatever you want. Said with irony, it's not freedom, it's an attempt at emotional control. And you are here for something greater than that, for conscious relationships, for bonds that uplift you, not confuse you, for an emotional life where you decide from your wisdom, not from guilt. As Marcus Aurelius said, the soul becomes invincible when it refuses to submit to the chaos of others. And that's the soul I invite you to reclaim today. If this message resonated with you, share it. We don't know how many women we could be saving from a story that they don't belong to. Like and subscribe to The Great Awakening to continue receiving content that nourishes the soul and strengthens your awareness. And if you're on a path of personal transformation, of returning to your center, of protecting your peace, keep going. Don't stop. Your soul will thank you.